Warning, this episode may contain content that is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Say you love collecting coins, so probably he could talk to you about your coin collection. And just the fact that you have something you think is in common kind of makes you feel a little, you let a guard down.
Connected, yeah.
Maybe it gives you a coin, familiarity with the parents, saying things like, again, in a church setting, they may be able to quote scripture backward and forward. That can actually be a way they groom. And what's so difficult about this is so many of these things are not wrong in themselves. They're right, or they can be right. But the good things can be used as a motivation for the bad things.
Welcome to LED Live. It's a show where we use the light of Christ to expose the darkness happening in media and our culture today. Today we're going to be touching on quite a sensitive topic, that of sex trafficking, human trafficking, I should say. And I'd like to welcome Hava to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Hava has been a director of and volunteered at numerous anti-trafficking organizations for over 12 years. So we just really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
So 12 years is a really long time. It's quite a commitment. So I'd love to hear your story and to know why you're so passionate about this and how you got involved.
Yeah. It's probably not like a really popular story, but at the end of the day, it's just a calling that I have. I don't have any super serious moment where, I'm like, a lot of people will be like, I remember the first time I heard that this was happening. I couldn't believe it. I don't remember that. What I do remember is being 8 years old and my grandma saying, yeah, I don't like to shop at Walmart. They use slave labor for a lot of those products. But I just remember that as a young child, obviously it's a really clear memory to me, but it wasn't, I kind of filed it away. I don't even remember as an adult the first time I heard about it. What I do know is I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and I live in a pretty comfortable area. And I just remember feeling so disconnected from the people around me, the people at church. And I started hearing about this, and I'm kind of the type of person that I like to investigate for myself. And so next thing I know, I'm out on the streets and doing this. And I remember in one of my trainings, they said, you can't promise these women a house with a dog and a fence. And I thought to myself, I have a house with a dog and a fence. Oh, yeah. And it made me grateful, for what I had. And it was in some ways for me, just because of the trauma that I had dealt with and was currently dealing with, in some ways I was able to identify better, I felt like, with them than the people around me. And so that really kind of was a launching point. I didn't have any lifelong goals or dreams at that point. I got my bachelor's degree in ministry leadership, which again was kind of not ever my goal to get it in that. It just kind of worked out because I needed to pay for it as I did it. And it was the program that was available for distant learning. And through that, I just kept reading and researching and just got pulled into it. There's been times I tried to walk away and God's like, nope.
Okay, well, yeah, that's why missions are so important, I believe, getting people outside of their bubble to see what's out there, not just for the purposes of exposure, but how they can get involved, how they can use their resources to impact someone else, especially if we're Christian, because that's what we're called to do.
100%, yeah.
So how about we, let's define human trafficking to set kind of like a foundation for this conversation.
Yeah. So
someone who may not know anything about it, how would you explain it to them?
Yeah, it's a technical, definition is the trade, and let's specifically use the word sex trafficking because there's other forms of trafficking that are bad, but it's just such a broad subject. So sex trafficking specifically is defined as the trade of some form of sex for some commodity. So that could be money, food, housing, drugs. It could be a wide variety of things. And a lot of trafficking, the money exchange does not actually go to the person being trafficked.
Okay. And are there different levels of scale? So it may not be a whole organization. It could just be a little agreement, so to speak, between, let's say, a landlord and a tenant.
Yes.
That could
Yeah.
still be considered sex
Yes.
trafficking. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's obviously like networks.
Does it fall under different names? Like, are there pseudonyms of sex trafficking to mask it or hide it?
I would say the term sex trafficking, it has become really popular lately.
Okay.
And I'm not quite sure if this is where you're going with this question, but it brings up a really, really good point. Sometimes law enforcement will actually categorize trafficking as domestic violence.
Huh.
And that is a huge disservice to actually what is taking place. And the reason that they do that is because that's the way the funding flows.
Wow.
Okay. So for instance, I have a town near me that is well known, and the people that know what's going on for trafficking, but they don't typically, I don't think their police department even has a category for it. They just classify it as domestic violence.
There's not a need to create a category to help these people?
That's where legislation comes in, but that is done at a legislative level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about things like, would you categorize sex trafficking as like a modern day slavery, or is that a separate conversation? Yes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, sex trafficking has gone on since, a really long time. I don't know where in the Bible we can actually point to the first time, that happened. But it is, I do think it's probably at its biggest right now.
Okay. So you're saying, it's more conversations are being had around this topic, but I'm sure there's still a level of stigma that's associated with it. Could you share any statistics of the men and women, or men versus women, that get involved? Is it not so much men, or maybe it's more men than we think, and any views about women? Any statistics you can share in regards to sex trafficking?
Yeah, so that is actually one of the myths you'll actually see listed when you look up. And I encourage your listeners to research this. Statistics are so incredibly hard because it's an illegal trade. And so they're probably not very good. So you only can kind of go with the information you have, and they will vary. But one of the common myths that people have is that it's a female-only problem, and that's not at all true. One of the statistics we were looking at just before the show showed that the percentages, 16% were women, 16% were boys and 17% were girls. So that's in a child, and I do think there is definitely, when you get in the child category, there's more boys than probably men. You know what I mean? When you get up. Not that men can't be, but that you're probably going to see more of that in labor trafficking.
But still, those are high numbers, and they're really close. It's not like a big number of little girls and small little boys. It's
right.
Okay.
And there's a lot of boys trafficked.
With that misconception, that could leave a lot of little boys vulnerable because the eyes aren't on them. Right. It's more on the little girls.
Yes.
But is it just little boys and girls, or is it men and women as well?
Yeah, it's men and women as well.
Okay.
I believe it was, those statistics I think were 23% are men. And then the remaining, which I can't remember what that number was, is about 40% I think are women.
Wow. Is it fair to say there's a certain group that's more susceptible to being targets of sex trafficking, or is it really kind of across the board, no one's safe type of thing?
Yeah. I would say hands down, if you want to pick one category, it would be low income.
Okay.
So socioeconomic level greatly impacts that. And then of course, and this is one reason that for me, illegal immigration is huge, is because those people are they have almost no recourse, and that is known, and they are preyed on.
Wow. Okay. So thinking of, using the terminology of being preyed on or being a target, you were earlier sharing with me an experience you had on your way over here on your plane ride.
Yeah.
You had an interaction with a young woman. You mind sharing that story?
No, it's crazy. So I had not paid the $19 for my seat. I'm still bitter about that.
I agree with you. To not pay.
I'm just I paid enough for this ticket, not paying another $19 to sit in my seat. So as a result of that, I suppose I was seated all the way in the second row from the back. And so I go all the way back on this flight, and I go to my row, and there's this young woman. She was actually on her way for spring break. So she's still in school. And she's kind of curled up, and she looks up at me and she says, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm not alone now." And I'm like, oh, hi. And I sat down, and then somebody else needed to sit there. So, and I asked her what her name was. She's like, my name is Judy. And so the person that was coming, he was supposed to sit in between us, but I'm like, you know what? Take the aisle. I'll go sit by Judy. And so he sits down, and these are, we're all strangers. We don't know anybody. And Judy like leans over and says to him, which she's like, do you have an iPhone charger? Which apparently she had identified that I don't have an iPhone. And he's like, sure. And I look at her and I'm like, Judy, you're a teenager. You don't have a phone charger?
Yeah.
And she says, I didn't know if I was allowed to have it on the plane. And so right away, I'm like, this girl isn't used to flying.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like and then later she said, this is the first time I saw like a male flight attendant. And so I'm like, clearly you're not used to flying. So she's, she lived about 3 hours from Columbus in kind of a rural area. Before we were just taxiing out of the gate, and she like had her head on my shoulder. Like,
oh wow, so very trusting.
She was just so trusting and so innocent. And part of me was just like so like drawn to that, in awe of it. But then
actually
also
refreshing, actually, when you think about it. She wasn't there with her headphones on and like not talking to anyone. She's engaging.
100%. And then like during the flight, like it got really bumpy, and she like looks at me, and I like smile. She like nuzzles up to me again, and I'm just like, oh. But then these like bells are going off in me, like, honey, you got to be careful who you do this to, because actually what predators do is they actually prey. That like familiarity is one way they prey on people, right? So like offering a charger or becoming a safe space for them if the flight is bumpy, that's actually how they prey on them.
But she's initiating it.
But she was initiating it. And so I'm just like, you have to be careful who you do that with. But I will say this, is predators they have like this radar that they can detect when someone is insecure, comes from an unstable environment that has been abused. And typically, like the way Judy was behaving, that didn't seem like her background. But for children or even adults that are, would have been much more common to be like crunched in the corner, no eye contact, like, and so they will prey on those people.
And that is a good point, because there's a difference between innocence and being withdrawn. Because from what you're saying, in Judy's case, being protected means there is a support system in place, or you have people in your life, which might be more of a turnoff for predators versus being withdrawn. There might be trauma there that they can tap into and maybe 100%. Manipulate. Okay, so it's not that, we shouldn't, like, it's a bad thing to be innocent. It's like in what context this person is living in or expressing what they've been through.
I think being innocent is okay, but I would say train your children, like just teach them,
What do you mean by that? Because someone might be afraid of exposing their child, or how do you teach without exposing or causing unintended trauma, so to speak?
I would definitely let them know that not everybody is safe. Okay. And, at age appropriate levels, even give them examples of that, like even in the news or whatever. Be very, very careful. You don't want to traumatize them, but you can let them know like this happened and that's why. And then really establish in them who their safe people are. Like these are people, teach them about their body from a very young age so that they know if something's not normal. You ingrain into children just that intuition. Right. And so you want them to be innocent, but you also want them to have that intuition, and especially in today's world, because there are predators all over and they're preying on the insecurities of children. So like the number one thing you can do is be a home and an environment for your children and even your friends' children that is stable. I have a friend who, her little girl's friend is in a really difficult situation. Her dad just died, and she has this girl at her house all the time. And I'm just thinking, you could be saving that girl from because she has a point to go to for safety and security. And children that have that typically carry themselves differently.
Okay. There was a video I saw a while back that actually became very controversial.
What do you do if you get lost?
Find a big black guy.
You find a big black guy, and what do you tell him?
And that I lost.
Oh, do I need to tell you there's a bunch of white people really upset about that video? Statistically, based on the data, any child would be safer approaching a strange black man than they would a strange white man. So let's look at some numbers. Convictions of possessing images of children. White people, 86%, while black make up only 4. I'd say white people damn near cornered the market. And as long as we're talking fun facts, let's look at this one. They looked at SA convictions from 2006 to 2017, and you know what they found? There was a 1,330.47% increase in sentences of black individuals and a 8.6 decrease in sentences for white individuals. So white people, far more likely to do it, also more likely to receive a lenient sentence for it.
Is there a danger in not just assuming, but seeing someone and labeling, or reading statistics and labeling in that way? Or should we really be on guard in the general sense of anyone can be a predator?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it okay to be like, there are really blatant signs that you can pinpoint? And I hope I'm
No, that's a
communicating
great
that
question.
clearly.
That's a great question, because that's actually a problem. But predators come in every walk of life. In fact, predators are often drawn to jobs around children. So, like that, we've seen kind of an explosion of teachers being outed as pedophiles, arrested, social workers, counselors, church workers, definitely youth ministers. I think maybe the statistic that she was like referring to is, I'm not familiar with that statistic, but the one thing I guess that came to my mind when you said that is, people do tend to assume that like a businessman in a suit is safe.
Okay.
And that is not a safe assumption. Any kind of generalities are difficult. I don't like generalities, but if I had to, some of the safest, guys that I know, they're rough. They're rough around the edges. They may be bikers, that type of thing, but they would go the ends of the earth to protect a child.
Yes. I say yes because the stories that I've heard are the people who you wouldn't expect to go above and beyond to help, whereas society's labeling them as a bad person. Okay. So can you take us into the mind of a perpetrator? And
that's a really scary place.
Yeah. Because when it comes to how they operate, they might come off as I've changed, or it is safe to be around me, or sometimes there's this double life that's being led.
Yeah.
So is it like issue on a chemical level, or is it just behavioral and it could change? Like when you think of the mind of someone who could do this to someone else, what is that like?
Yeah. So one of the things I do like to start with is defining like different kinds of perpetrators, because it can vary. Someone who preys on a prepubescent child, there's something not right there. That is not normal. Whereas even someone who, like a predator who assaults someone that, maybe looks like an adult, even if, it's still wrong, right? And it still needs to be dealt with. But if they're preying on a child, there's something really, really seriously wrong with that person. And that typically is pretty hard to change. And I believe that Jesus can change anybody and set anybody free. But these are typically highly skilled, manipulative people. And they don't just groom the child, they groom the securities around the child. So if they're in a church, and they are in churches, they will groom the pastor. They will groom they may be the youth pastor, but if they're not, they may groom the youth pastor. They will groom the parents. They will groom the teachers. And so that it becomes, maybe the child's word against the perpetrator, like
who everyone knows.
And everybody's like, yeah, we just had a barbecue at his house, and like he said all this great stuff. Here's another thing. Sometimes, a lot of times, they're involved in like anti the thing they're doing. So like traffickers get involved in anti-trafficking organizations.
Wow. Okay.
And so like that's a really great place to hide, hiding in plain sight is way more common than people think, but there's a grooming going on. And then the second thing though is, I said a minute ago that it can become the child's word against the predator, but a lot of times the child doesn't even have a voice because of maybe their home situation, again, because they prey on children that don't have recourse for a lot of things, but the predators often threaten them, so they will say, really, this is probably more typical for a trafficking case, but like what could kill your family if you tell anybody, and that puts the burden on the child to keep that safe.
Wow. So thinking about the mind of a perpetrator, they tend to be more manipulative, or they would inject themselves into something that is really fighting against them for whatever reason. You were using the term grooming. Just so everyone's clear, what exactly is that? What does it mean to groom someone? Because I would assume grooming a child is different from grooming the people around them.
Right. So grooming a child could look like, here's a sucker. What's your name? How old are you? Do you want to play with my, toy set? Like, one red flag can be, especially males, but I guess it could be anybody that has children's toys and stuff, and they have no connection to children. Like, that's typically a red flag.
No connection to children? What do you mean?
So like, you go to their house and they have all these toys, but they have no children, and they don't have like nieces and nephews that are there every other weekend.
Okay.
So it's like, why? And I do want to be clear in this, because this subject is such a hot subject that it's hard to talk about it balanced, right? So I do believe that innocent until proven guilty. So I don't want people to just be like,
suspicious of
that guy's a pedophile. He has teddy bears. You know what I'm saying? I do believe in that. However, if there's signs like that, you should be watching very, very closely. And if there's an accusation, especially like in an environment within a church or where they have access to children, the appropriate people in charge need to safeguard those children. And so sometimes, unfortunately, it's just the world we live in. Justice is never swift, unfortunately, as much as we like to think, but never also accurate. And so to actually get a conviction, sometimes it takes a lot. Right. And so you might have a situation where, you're pretty confident that this person isn't safe, but you can't put a legal label on them because it wasn't able to be proven in a court of law. Wow. So you still have to protect, you know what I mean? And that's why like policies and organizations and churches are really, really important. And not to judge people, but I think we have this dynamic going on that's so weird to me, is like, we're more afraid of offending a person than we are protecting a child.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a thing in the church, and it's, elsewhere as well. But that's really why you want to have those standards in place. Like, you want to have a policy in place before it happens.
Be prepared. Don't just react all the time. Be prepared before it happens.
The other thing is like, and I'm not a lawyer, this isn't legal advice, but typically, like from a liability standpoint, like if you fire someone because they are, let's say that they spent time with a child alone, and you don't have a policy against that, it's harder to have justification for the firing.
Okay.
Or if something happens and you don't have policies in place, then you can also be liable for that. So
which I don't agree with. I don't disagree with, I should say. Both should be held at fault, the perpetrator and the people who didn't do their due diligence in protecting. Yeah. And it's also amazing how a little can go such a long way. The little things that the church can do to protect their members can dissuade predators. I remember growing up, my church had a sort of meeting like that about the little changes that were going to be made. So every door in the church was going to have a window installed, especially in the Sabbath school rooms and where children congregated. And as of present, when we were having those meetings, the doors that didn't have those windows would remain open. No matter how much noise was coming out of the room, they're going to remain open. And
huge deterrent right there, right?
can help. So just being mindful and aware.
Yeah.
But thinking about that, why? Actually, I'll save that for later. I want to stay on the topic of.
Well, let me finish your question about grooming the parents, because that's a really great question. But it's going to vary by the setting. Groomers, I feel like, are really intelligent in the area of knowing how to read people, typically, and knowing like what things. So say, for instance, I don't know you well enough to know this, but like, say you love collecting coins, so probably he could talk to you about your coin collection, and just the fact that you have something you think is in common kind of makes you feel a little, you let a guard down.
Connected,
maybe it gives you a coin. Familiarity with the parents, saying things like, again, in a church setting, they may be able to quote scripture backward and forward. That can actually be a way they groom. And what's so difficult about this is so many of these things are not wrong in themselves. They're right, you know what I mean? Or they can be right, but the good things can be used as a motivation for the bad things. And again, back to your question about like the difference between like what's going on in a predator. The average time a predator offends is 70.
Average?
Yes.
70.
Is 70.
This is one person.
So when you, yes, and that goes back to that's why I like to make the distinction between, so like take a guy, and I don't want to just use guys because women do it too. Now, predators do tend to be far more male than female. But if a man has an affair, that's wrong. That's sin. It's bad, but it follows like normal human fleshly desire, right? And I think there's a big difference between that. When you have people preying on children, that's not even a normal human fleshly desire. So that type of person is probably more apt to have an addiction to it and not stop.
Okay.
Because they can't.
Understood. And so how do you respond to that or react? Like if someone does make the claim, oh, I've changed, let me into your circle. What can we do?
I think, like, for one thing, any sin, forgiveness does not mean that there aren't boundaries, right? And so again, coming back to this dynamic we have going on where protecting children is not a real high priority across the board in our society. It just isn't. But if you make it a high priority, you're going to have a lot of tears. And I would say, honestly, for someone, they may have to accept that they're never going to be able to be with a child alone. Like, I don't think that's too far for someone who offended a child at all. I mean, you think about Jesus reserved his strongest language for that person. Like he said, it would, like he basically said, it'd be better they be killed.
Yeah.
Like that's what,
true.
like that's what Jesus said about it. And yet we just are afraid of offending a lot of times.
That's a good point. Wow. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, talking about trauma and the response of the nervous system to trauma and the neurological pathways that are made. That's natural anyway. The things that we do, the habits that we create impacts our mind. So trauma does the same. So does the trauma that victims experience in this situation, does it alter their minds in a way that a perpetrator's mind is already altered?
So it alters it, not necessarily, I don't know if I would compare it to the way a perpetrator, like something is wrong, with their mind, obviously, but trauma damages a child or anybody, an adult. It damages, you can have trauma at any age. The earlier it is, so here's an interesting thing. Trauma, the context of trauma is typically more important than the trauma itself.
Okay, how so?
So I'll give you an example, and this example comes from Adam Young. He's a trauma counselor. You have a 12-year-old girl at school. One of the older boys takes her out behind a woodpile, does something to her, okay? So we're going to take two 12-year-old girls, exact same scenario. One of them screams, run home and tells her parents. Her parents get to the principal. The boy's expelled from school and stuff like that. That girl is not going to be as long and as deeply impacted as the other one who has nobody to tell. And so she freezes. Yeah. That will live in her and that will shape, yes, because we were talking earlier about, the way our brains are made, there's actual neural pathways and neuron connections, and they're developed by experiences and by thought patterns, right? And so the girl who has no one to go to, it just replays in her mind. And then, then she sees that boy every day and he smirks at her, more neural pathways. And it becomes it can damage her life permanently. And in those cases, that's a child that's going to typically be more vulnerable to a predator or a trafficker in the future.
There's an experience you shared about what a father did to help his daughter. Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah. So I was speaking at the Lions Club, which was awesome. They were like all these grandpa and grandmas, And so I kind of like when I talk, I like to kind of, sense the crowd, like and they were very interested in like their grandchildren, like what they can do. And so I was talking quite a bit about that. And after I got done, this man pulls me aside. He said, I want to tell you a story. He's like, my daughter, and his daughter's grown, but he said when she was in school, she was molested by some of the older boys. And we went to the principal and she said, no, they would never do that. So there you have, principal's probably groomed, right? Because these boys are always respectful to her and they carry out her trash and, who knows what.
Boy, yeah.
And so she says they would never do that. And he said, I watched my daughter, her personality change. She started dressing goth, and he like basically emptied out his 401k and moved her to another state and put her in another school. And I said, you know what, you could have saved her life by doing that, because and I, just to be clear, I do think like good therapy is important for that. And I don't know if she got that, but the fact that she had a dad who said who was tuned in enough to recognize what was going on and know that what she said was true and say, this isn't right, and I'm going to protect you by this, probably changed the complete trajectory of her life.
Wow, that's amazing. It's really disheartening to hear the principal's attitude towards that, because she used what she saw, her assumption, to come to a conclusion like, oh, they're not capable. It just sounds like, no, the Bible says the heart is deceitful above all, who can know. And so trusting our own, let's say, intuitions or what we see, it doesn't prove right most of the time. And so investigation should happen for any claim. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And the difficult reality of this too is, what if there was no evidence?
Okay.
Then it's a he said, she said.
But is that evidence, the change within the girl? Could that be seen as evidence?
From a parental standpoint, 100%. But also from a school principal, I don't know if that would have been enough for her to get him, you know what I mean? Expelled. And that's what's really, really difficult. I was just listening, I'm going through the Bible, and they, even in the Old Testament, God says 2 or 3 witnesses. And these people know, you know what I mean? They get them alone. So even though, and I will probably continue to talk a lot about this, like there's a lot of areas that we need to do better with justice, because there's a lot of areas where justice is not, but there are still some areas that, they're not going to be made right. But here's the important part is, regardless of what that principal did, I don't know this girl's total relationship, but just from the story, I assume that her dad was a very important figure in her life. And so the fact that the most important person in her life responded that way, that was critical.
Okay.
So you have to protect your own.
So for a family who may not have the resources to relocate, or they're stuck, they don't know how to respond, who do we go to for help? What can we do to help someone who has been traumatized, who's been assaulted, who's gone through any kind of sex trafficking? Who can we go to? Who can we call for help?
That's a really great question. I would say you would have to check in your own local area, typically.
Okay.
Typically, you're going to want to see a trauma counselor. I am really big on like the polyvagal therapy, where you have to retrain the nervous system. So, if the nervous system never forgets, like that horrific experience is imprinted on their whole being, essentially, because it's their nervous system, right?
It can sometimes be discouraging, as you just said, that sometimes the authorities are put in a hard position because they need evidence to go through the investigation. But even with that, you still think it's still good to pursue the authorities, or to contact the authorities
100%,
in every case to try to get help.
Yeah, seeing justice served on a legal aspect can be very healing for a survivor. So if that, and here's the thing, if the average offender offends 70 times, you at least have it on the record.
Okay, that's good.
So at least you have that, but hopefully they'll do the right thing. I have been with victims in the, the criminal process, and it's very difficult.
Okay, so that's the one area for more of a reaction or a response. is to reach out to the local authorities or to get help from therapists or counselors, or really tap in not just to help someone cognitively, but physically in their nervous system. But what about some preventions? Like before these things happen, what can, let's say, a parent or a community do to help the children, to help the people that we are really called to protect?
One of the things that I think is there's an epidemic of in our society, and I think that's why so many of our children are vulnerable, is parents are so preoccupied that they're missing. When I had some trauma training, it was taught by this dear, sweet old, like 90-year-old woman. She was amazing, but she kept talking about like the drug epidemic and how parents aren't meeting their children's needs because of the drug and the alcohol, and that's absolutely on the table. I don't want to take that off. Okay. But what is happening, like especially for middle class America, especially within, just normal people and even in the church, is you see parents that are so preoccupied they miss their children. So that could be they're both working, and they're coming home, and there's dinner, and they're giving their children a good life. They have a great home, they have a great school, they have a great neighborhood, but the children don't have their parents. A second thing that's really, really huge is we already have a generation that have children now that have themselves been traumatized, and that has not been addressed. And you cannot meet your child at a place that you haven't dealt with in yourself.
That's good. Yeah.
And that is huge. And so, the number one thing is fix your own issues. If you're in conflict between mom and dad all the time, you're preoccupied with that, right? Get it together for your children. And I don't mean that in a unkind way, because most of these people are dealing with their own really severe trauma. Essentially, they say that a lot of times development stops at the age someone was traumatized, right? Wow. So let's say if there was a really significant event at 9 years old.
They seem to be stuck there.
Yes, usually a part of them emotionally will be stuck at that age. Wow. And so I think we have a lot of parents who are stuck at an age, like when you think about the statistics, which I think are currently, they change, but like I think it's a lot, like 3 to 4 out of 5 women have been had sexually assaulted. Like it's astronomical, and a lot of those women don't talk about that, And if they haven't dealt with that in their own life, and let's talk about guys too. I mean, we heard the statistic about boys, and it's even harder for guys to deal with it. So if they're not facing, and it doesn't even have to be that, it could just be whatever. But just junk that they're bringing from their childhood. If they haven't dealt with that enough to be aware of the children in their care, they could totally miss what's going on.
There are instances in the Bible of generational curses, one thing passing on from the next to the next. And personally, I believe that's what it's talking about. Not necessarily that it's God cursing a generation. It's more of the mentality of the forefathers is just being passed on from child to child to child, and they're just stuck in this perpetual loop that is just very destructive to the generations to come. So yeah, it is so important to take the time to process what we've gone through in our own lives, and so that we could be fully aware and be able to be attuned and connect with our children, and to help them through what they're going through, and not necessarily be in a state of denial, so to speak. Okay, so that's one area. The home is an important place. It needs to be a place where the child can freely communicate with the parent. It's like the first line of defense, so to speak. What other protections can be put in place?
So I do like to start with home, because I think that that's the number one, calling. But I also think that we need to be going out beyond that. So even think about your children's friends, because they may not come from a home like that. Yeah. So you may catch something. I mentioned my friend earlier, who is a secure place for her daughter's friend who's going through a really difficult time. So be aware of that. And then if I could name one single thing that would probably deal with trafficking, and this is just from my own years of research and involvement in both of these topics, but politics drive this. Like politics drive the trafficking. There's a huge...
you're talking about legislation that had not been put in place.
Not only legislation, but when the Epstein thing came out, that blackmail thing is real. That blackmail thing is absolutely real, and it's way more common than people realize.
Even on the lower levels?
It can.
Okay.
I think sometimes on the lower level, it can be more like your bot. Or here's the other thing: the higher level people, they run organizations. I was just looking at a website, and the website is run for something, and it's ran by. They want more progressive people in office. And so they're actually, and when it means run for something, it means anything, right? And so when you have, like, local government is so important because you need to be on your school board. So the policies, because this is like the whole LBGT agenda that comes right into this. Yes. A lot of this stuff that we all know about, right? That's more commonly talked about. It's connected, right? And so we need to be in. You don't have to have your kids in the school to be on the school board, by the way. True. Typically, you know, because here's one thing. What I was telling you a little bit about our story earlier, and I told you how the one day when I was director, I was like looking for social media to post, which turns out I'm not very good at social media.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I was like scrolling through, and like there's all these organizations, and I saw a new one. And they had some story, I don't remember who it was, but it was like mom, daughter, sister was trafficked. And that's, you know, and so many of these organizations are birthed out of that. And I had this moment of, we don't have a story like that. And just like that, like God said to me, your story is that you should not have to go through this. To recognize the need and rise to it. That's the calling of the church.
Yes, it is.
That's why Jesus came. Like Jesus entered this world. And so as Christians, it's not enough to be like, well, we're homeschooling our children. We got, you know, we have a good emotionally connected family, like everything's good. It's not enough as a Christian. We are called to look out for these more vulnerable. And one of the best ways you can do that is get involved in your local government. So even things like, some of it is actually not that complicated. Like, I'm from Ohio, so we have central county commission seats. You have influence all the way up the chain. Just in that, and I think we have quarterly meetings, you know what I mean? But that actually has a far range effect. County commissioners, you know, the people who control where your money in your school goes. But in a lot of cases, I don't actually think we're voting for the people that influence these policies, that make these things easy. And if you start like looking into policy, you will see how policy drives a lot of that.
Okay. Well, that's why it's a collective of efforts that 100%. Need to be done, not just focusing on one thing, because there might be some level of corruption or maybe it doesn't work out. But I mean, you may have the wrong politician in office, but if the community itself is strong and it's protecting, then great. You know, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
Because one thing that COVID showed us was the importance of local government. Because there were areas that like had really hard measures and there's like really horrible things going on. And then there was counties that pretty much went on as normal.
Yes, that's true.
and that really showed like the importance of those really your local judge seats and, you know, all of that kind of thing. And I do want to say this because as Christians, we have like politics is a really bad word. And I want to differentiate between, quote, politics and politicians, okay? Because you don't have to be a politician to do this stuff, right? But I'm talking about politics as simply the way we do life. And if we as Christians aren't leading out in the right godly way to do life, who's going to take the lead in that?
So what does that look like? You know what I mean? Because there tends to be a little bit of oblivion, like people are a little oblivious to what's happening right now, but with the call as Christians to be aware and to act, how would the lifestyle of a Christian reflect, hey, I'm aware and I'm trying to do something about the atrocities that are happening, specifically sex trafficking?
I think, you know, one of the things, because we all have limited time, right? And I'm saying like, tune into your children, which takes time, right? Yeah. But when you look at how pleasure-driven our society is, how much time are we spending on pleasure? And there's a place for pleasure. I am not against it. That's something beautiful God made. But when you look at adults and the amount of toys they have sometimes, and this is probably going to offend some of the guys, but like the obsession with sports, you know, again, I'm not against. I mean, I'm from Ohio. I have become a Buckeye fan because for my own safety. But, you know, like just giving that much, like in some ways, let's be honest, worship.
Yeah.
right?
That's an appropriate word.
And we have a God who has called us to worship him. And part of the worship is obeying him and living like him,
Amen.
right?
Yep.
And I think that part of the reason these subjects are so like vague is because there's a lack of awareness. And so here's another thing. This is really weird, but go with me here. I said to a friend, this guy he's a CPA. He's a smart guy. He is very conservative Mennonite, maybe even beachy. So he doesn't vote. He doesn't have any political involvement at all.
Okay.
He's a smart guy though. And so I said, Thad, because I had done this presentation, I think it was at like a business leaders roundtable, and like people don't know, right? And I said, Thad, what is going on? Like why, when they started legalizing full-term abortion in some areas,
Yeah, I remember.
people freaked out. I didn't freak out. And here's why. I'm like, they're doing it to alive children. It's no different.
Well,
What's the difference?
from perspective, yeah.
Right? But so I said to him, I said, why is the abortion issue such a hot topic? And hear me here, I'm pro-life, 100%. But it's not my particular calling, although I 100% support it. But I asked him, I said, why does that, like, most Christians will, like, land on pro-life stance with that and post it to their profile and post outrage when, whatever, do all the things. I said, but nobody talks about this. And here's what he said: politics. He said, it's a Republican issue. They run on it and they keep it at the forefront in everybody's mind.
I see.
And I went, you're right. Is it a right issue? 100%. But I have to, so here's where I differ in politics. Should we be getting our passion about things from politics?
Right, exactly.
So my thing is like our Christianity, our walk with God, our commitment to him should drive society. It should drive what's going on. So we shouldn't just so in abortion is such a politically divisive issue, right? And that's how they win votes. And again, I am anti-abortion, but we shouldn't just be, taking our cues from them.
Yep.
We should be giving the cues. Same thing with, I mentioned this whole social justice movement. The church has been so lax in biblical justice that the world has created their own phony version. And in many cases, the church has just said, okay, here, go. Let's stamp a few Bible verses on it and we're good to go.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
And I love the church.
Yeah,
I love the church, but that's partly why I'm passionate about this, is because we need to emulate Christ more.
That's right. And think about what it means to be anti-abortion. What does it mean to be anti-trafficking? Because it's more than just words. It's more than just saying it. It's also in action. What companies are you supporting that actively take part in the thing that you are anti? Yeah. Just doing that little bit of research and being mindful of the consumerism mentality and 100%. What you're putting your money towards. And then turn around and say, well, I don't have enough money to donate towards this thing that.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. And we were talking about Nike earlier, because that's just a really easy, and most people know that Nike uses some really significant slave labor in there. And yet, I mean, shouldn't that affect our buying? Not to mention they're like seriously overpriced, but like to your point, having money for like. Oh,
as you say that in my shoes. Okay, good conversation. We're learning.
I have like 2 pairs of Nike, and I'm not kidding. This is really embarrassing because I'm a girl. I shouldn't be like this, but like they're like 10 years old, and one of them was given to me, and they're like my running shoes. so I haven't bought Nike like ever since I like learned all of this. But yeah, it should. I think that's part of following Christ.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
And it's part of who are we serving?
And just being honest with ourselves and really thinking about what it truly is to be something is really, I feel like, the basis, the foundation to then take actions in our lives. Not to be either in a mundane cycle or just, showing up to where we're supposed to be. Let's just use church as an example, doing the things that we're supposed to do on that day during that time, and then we just go back to regular life from day to day. No. Right. Christianity is so much more than that. So I just wanted to make sure I got all of these areas when it comes to parents and communities who want to protect their children. Of course, the first line of defense is the home. but not just in your own home, but looking out to see who else that you can help and impact as well. And then getting in contact with local authorities, but also being mindful of the local politics or getting involved in the legislation process within the community, knowing
and
your
state,
rights and their state, true, because it differs from state to state.
Yes,
right?
yes, 100%, yeah.
And then, of course, supporting the correct organizations and also being mindful of some unintentional support that you're putting out there that may be in complete conflict to your belief system. So did I get all those?
Yeah, we should probably touch on CPS or Child Protective Services.
Sure.
Child Protective Services, like if you statistically, I think it's like 70-80% of like runaways and often trafficking children were in foster care. So it's a huge, huge demographic. And so that's another area the church can help. I know like in Ohio, we have, I think it's Safe Families and Village Families, and they're amazing because what they do is they go in and they help, instead of like the children going into the system, because once they're in the system, it's very hard to get them out.
Yes,
so what they do is they step up and they'll take children into their homes, like say mom and dad are having a struggle or single mom has to be in the hospital. So they'll actually take the children into the home until mom helps, and then they help reintegrate them with the mom. It's amazing. So that's a really big deal. I just want to put out there too, just about CPS, know your laws, like know your local laws. Like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talk right now about like, do you have to open the door to police? Do you have to let them in your home? Find out about that with CPS, because in almost every case that I have heard where there was like something like that didn't seem right going on, they let them into their house. So, and I'm not saying, don't find out what your legal responsibility is there. And I'm just going to share a story, if I could, about what we're talking about, just to give people a little bit of an idea of things they want to be on the lookout for. But I have a really good friend who divorced her husband. He had abused the children, and she had custody. But he was able to actually get custody from her, the abusive father. And the way they did this was through two things. One was the parental alienation.
Parental alienation.
So
I'm assuming she kept the children away for a reason because of the abuse. So what does that mean?
Parental alienation is it's a pretty broad net.
Of course it is.
Like what can go into that? In this particular case, they told the mother that she was brainwashing her children into believing their father had abused them. And so she was causing parental alienation from their father because their children were rightly saying that their father had abused them. So from what we have seen, parental alienation is always used against the mother. Now, statistically, children are safer with their mother. Now, again, I don't like generalities because there's always those cases, but statistically, in a situation like that, they're safer with the mother. The second, so they took the children, completely revoked all custody based on that. And because another thing was she has to notify the court when she moved, and she did, but then she moved again and she didn't get them notified of that. So the other thing is make sure you know everything, and follow everything to the T, because those are the rules you got to play by. But people need to understand that these things are happening. That's not an isolated story regarding Child Protective Service at all. Like I know there's dozens of them. I'm in chat groups with parents.
And does it kind of go back to the burden of proof, because it was really the children saying that they were abused, but there might not have been proof, and that's why the courts were able to do all of that? In
this particular case, I would lean more towards corruption.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no, I don't see any logical reason for that.
Wow.
Okay. No legal, because if you're going by what, the children said it, I don't even think there was probably not even a proper investigation with proper qualified people to even determine,
Well, to that point, I mean, a parent could easily feel overwhelmed with what they need to know, what they need to do, all these targets that are on the backs of their children, all the threats that are out there. So what would you say to a parent? What encouragement can you give to help them through this process of raising their child, protecting their child, and then of course, not just their child, but someone else's child as well?
I think one of the big things is we have to walk in faith and not fear. And that's really, really hard when you dive into this. But at the end of the day, I've been thinking about that verse where God says in the Old Testament, we know that at the end of time, so much bad stuff is going to happen. And now we're actually seeing what that actually looks like.
Yes.
In some ways, I'm sure that, there's a lot we don't know. But we dare not forget that he says in the last days, I will pour out my spirit.
Amen.
And what I love about that verse is it talks about your children. So you think about, we're in a time in society where our children are just onslaughted by, an attack of evil. But the promise from God is at this very time, he will pour out his spirit on our children. And so it gives hope and it gives a promise, and you have to walk with God. And I think that, one of the problems that we do have is, we're distracted, we're complacent, we'd rather hang out in front of the TV instead of watching the ball game or whatever, than find out what's going on in our communities or in our nation or in our world. And training our children, like teaching them. Research has actually shown that you only have to be attuned to your children like 30% of the time, like high quality attunement, if they're in a stable situation. And so I just think as a mom, if I was a mom, that'd be great news. But like if you have a good setup and then you do give that, just tuning into your child, that can prevent
because
so much.
the unrealistic expectation is 100%, right? But
Yes.
the reality is at least the eye contact, little things, right, can build up into a great protection for the child.
Yes. Connection. If you have trauma, I love this definition of trauma, but trauma is the chronic disruption of connection. So if you build that kind of connection with your child, you're going to be worlds ahead. And I do want to say this for the parents out there that maybe had something bad happen. There is nothing you can do to 100% foolproof it. We live in a world of trouble. Like that suffering happens, but God can redeem even that suffering.
Or you're speaking to the guilt sometimes that parents may feel, or even the victims may feel.
The victims, or like parents, like, how come that happened to my child? Like, I thought I did everything right, God redeems. Like, even if I'm sure everybody makes mistakes, right? Like, but even if you did it perfectly, there's no guarantee, because we do live in a world of trouble, but God redeems.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Ava, for being here. I'm wondering if you have any resources that you can give to people if they want to search more deeper into this topic, or if they'd like to contact you, how could they do that?
Yeah. So I would say you don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Okay, that's good. That's a good disclaimer.
It's very hard to decipher through what is out there. One of the things that was really impactful for me is I read a book called The Franklin Cover-Up.
Okay.
It's a hard book to read, but what I love about the book is it was written by late Senator John DeCamp, and it's basically witness statements, court documents, news articles, and pretty much that's it. Okay. And it tells a story, and it happened late 70s, early 80s. So you read that book and you understand if that was happening then, what do you think is happening now? Yeah. For getting involved locally and learning more about elections, I would go to, it's A1000, like 1000 cuts. So it's A1000cuts.org. Okay. It's really just a video that kind of shows some things people experience, but then you can sign up to get information. Okay. And then for nonprofits, we talked briefly about this earlier, but like a lot of nonprofits like are not up to good. They kind of have a stigma now. Right now, I would recommend the America Project, because I know some of them, I've seen the work, and they're really doing some of the stuff that like cuts the base of this stuff. So that is where those are organizations I would 100%, recommend, support, get involved in. For me right now, I'm kind of in a transitional stage. So my Instagram is the easiest. It's at Havalyn. It's HAVAHLYNN.
Okay, great. Thank you. And, I just want to share some Bible text here, talking about the responsibility that we have as Christians. Psalm chapter 82, verses 3 and 4 says, "Give justice to the poor and the orphan, uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute, rescue the poor and helpless, and deliver them from the grasp of evil people." It's not for us as Christians to just sit there and pray, pray for, hey, someone else can deal with that. God, we're just in this amazing partnership, or God calls us to be in this amazing partnership with him, in that we are called to act, and he comes and does the rest, the things that we cannot, that are out of our control. He takes care of, but he has called us to, hey, put on your shoes, get out there and do something. And scripture does give us instructions. It gives us encouragement as tips on how to do that. We should never feel alone or overwhelmed at the task that is put before us as Christians. And one more, I'd like to read Isaiah 43, because someone may ask, where is God in these situations? Why is this happening to me? And Isaiah says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. This is God speaking. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you, for I am the Lord your God. God is with you. He loves you. He's there to work with you. He's just asking for you to put your hand in his, and to also be obedient to his word and his will. So I hope that this episode was not only informative, but encouraging to you. If you'd like to hear more from Hava, we'll put all her information, her details in the description below. If you have something that you'd like to share, or a question that you have, you can write them down in the comments section below. We're only able to put on these productions and also have wonderful guests on our show because of your support. So please, if you haven't already, subscribe to Little Light Studios. And if you're willing to give a monetary contribution, please check out our website, littlelightstudios.tv, or you can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/littlelightstudios. Thank you again for your support, and we will see you next time on LED Live. Bye-bye.
Do you have questions about the Bible that you've been struggling to find the answers for? Video Bible Study, or VBS for short, is a YouTube channel that answers your Bible questions in 5 minutes or less. Check out these easy to understand, comprehensive videos talking about everything from what happens when you die to why does God allow suffering. Make it your goal to deepen your relationship with Christ this year, and subscribe to Video Bible Study on YouTube to help you along your journey.